red flag in a job interview that says walk away. Story 1, when they try to offer you a salary that's lower than what they're offering, like the job ad says 50K to 70K, but they try to offer you 40K, and they try to justify it by saying you're not experienced enough. Except you are experienced enough. You might even have more than enough experience. Story 2 years ago, I had the worst job ever. I worked 80 hours a week for a narcissistic boss who delighted in pitting one employee against another. What I should have asked in the interview was, how did this position open up? I found out later that my predecessor had committed suicide at work. Story 3, as an HR person, I'm going to give you the best list you'll ever find on when to run away from my job. I worked at Fortune 500 companies and in small mom and pop shops, and worked with the EEOC and a labor board commission on both sides. And I can tell you that if it's a company that is trying to make money, and even nonprofits, they're all the same. 1, we really like team players here. They're going to take advantage of you. 2, you were offered the job immediately to start tomorrow or that day. No one else will put up with the bull here, and we need bodies. 3, they do not post the job wage. They're trying to pay people less than what they can afford to. We have no wiggle room in our budget for salary. That's a lie because most people are afraid of confrontation, and it works. 5, they try to ask you how much you're currently making before giving you an offer. They're going to lowball you. In a company that doesn't see your value from the beginning, never will. 6, we're like a family here. They mean the dysfunctional, abusive kind. 7, they beat and switch you for the job title and position available. Not only is kind of illegal, it shows integrity that's going to continue on the 8. They are late to the interviews, specifically the hiring manager. This shows that the hiring managers are not communicating with HR properly, or they don't have time for interviews, which means your training is also most likely going to be disorganized while you're still accountable for everything. 9, they ask you probing questions like, what kind of music do you like to listen to? If it's a phone interview, these questions to help them determine your race. And a potential discriminatory factor. 10, they ask questions unrelated to the job, like if you have a car. Most people don't know this is actually illegal. You're only allowed to ask job-related questions as they directly relate to the job. Asking if someone has a car can be used as a discriminatory factor because cars are considered financial privileges. Always answer with I have reliable transportation. And if they ask you to elaborate, just reaffirm that I've always made it to where I need to go on time. If you don't have a car. 11, any discriminatory or question this should go without saying. 12, being the only person of your gender in the workplace. This is usually the groundwork for a very biased situation or unfair treatment. And the worst part is that a lot of times when there are issues, you get silenced because it turns into a boys or girls club where outsiders are not believed or taken seriously. I've worked in both fields, and both men and women do it when they have a position of authority and power in the workplace. 13, they start to ask you your availability outside of normal working hours that was not mentioned on the job description. They're trying to gauge your ability to work for free or overtime. 14, they pushed back when you try to negotiate your pay and even potentially pull the offer. If this happens, you 100 dodge the bullet. People that are not desperate for people don't get offended with negotiating a salary or benefits. 15, if the person giving the interview or the people around the building or in the building look depressed or look like they're uninterested, this is an indicator of what you will look like. I know what your life will be like working there. 16, check their reviews on Glassdoor prior to going to the interview. Most of them are negative for every company because most people only leave a review when they're angry, but it gives you an idea of what to potentially ask about in the interview. 17, ask them the average tenure of an employee at the company, description idea of how long the average employee stays there, because people usually don't quit bad jobs. They quit bad management. 18, ask about promotion opportunities from within the company versus outside hires. If they always hire management from outside the company, just be aware that you're probably going to never promote and will most likely need to find a new job if that's your desire. 19, ask them what their favorite part about working at this job is. If their direct response to this is PTO or a benefit and not an aspect of the environment or the job itself, it's a form of escapism, and it's probably not a good sign. 20, anything more than 2 interviews, unless you are interviewing for a position that makes 6 figures, they're just wasting your time. And most likely there's a different candidate that they're wanting that they're delaying for. 21, ask how many internal employees are applying for this position. It gives you an idea of internal promotion as well as how desirable the position is, as well as the likelihood of you getting the position. 22, any type of buzzwords like synergy or vibe. Just know you're going to be done with a lot of high school bull. 23, the personality and respect given by the people interviewing you, if they're narcissistic or pompous or anything of that nature, don't even bother, because that's most likely going to be your manager and you're going to hate your job. 24, we work hard and we play hard. You were going to be worked like a dog and then forced to go to a company gathering that no one but the managers wanted to go to, where you'll be forced to play games 25. We're getting on the ground floor. We're a startup or anything that sounds like they're just taking on a huge amount of business unlike what they're used to. You were about to be met with the most unorganized and chaotic environment that will not pay for even the therapy, let alone the value you bring to the team or the stress of the situation. 26. I think education is more valuable than experience, even decades of it, where they're unwilling to change with the time frame. This is not always a bad thing, but if you go to a place that's still using paper for everything and it's not a government job, 9 times out of 10, they just never wanted to update technology, which means they're also going to be using old practices and habits that no longer work. Edit, thanks for all the responses. This is my eyes rated comment so far. I'm going to make some posts on my profile, which will go into more details on these and a few other issues later today. Story 4, when they ask if I have any questions for them. I ask, what do you like about working here? If they take too long to answer or can't name anything, it's pretty much guaranteed I won't like working there. Story 5, during one of my interviews, as I was talking to the hiring manager, I could tell he's a little sarcastic, power tripping. His assistant was sitting across from me, and he looked depressed, like he just wanted to quit on the spot. Sometimes the red flag is reading people's body language on how the boss enters the room. Story 6, had an interview for a sales position the other day, and they said they only hire women because women are better at sales. Am I right? I'm a woman, but IDC, that comes off creepy as... Story 7, where like a family, they badmouth one of their current employees to you. They say you have to buy anything from them or bring your own supplies, but you'll be reimbursed. They make you do any work for free as part of the interview process. They get weird about any clarifying questions you have. The interviewer does not speak the same language as you. They make any comments about your age or appearance. Story 8, one time I asked how much I'd be getting paid per hour, and the interviewer told me that they prefer applicants who don't want to only come to work for the money. So that... Story 9, I arrived early for an interview, and the secretary screamed, "You're late," upon seeing me, when I was actually early guest. The other person bailed. Just shows you how you'll be treated going forward. Story 10, I interviewed for a 6-figure job, and they wanted me to commit to a 5-year contract while being paid 30 less than the average market rate. They said if I left before the end of the 5 years, it was a $50,000 penalty, and I couldn't work at a competing business within 30 miles. I wanted to negotiate around what they were offering and at least writing guaranteed annual 6 raises to outpace inflation, but they wouldn't even budge on that. So you want me to make you millions of dollars while you sit on your greedy, and in exchange gracefully pay me super base, guarantee no raises, and keep me hostage in your business. I still can't believe the recruiters seem to try and talk me out of walking away when I said no. Story 11, I once answered a few questions at an interview as a record store manager, and their third question was, when can we schedule a lie detector test? Of course, not being an idiot and knowing that this is against state law, I jumped at the chance just for the experience. By the time it was over, they thought I was the Unabomber. Story 12, I was at a group test for a company, and the person flat out told us that we are not allowed to have personal cell phones at work. Okay, but then they proceeded to tell us that if someone called to get a hold of us by calling the company, that they wouldn't pass on any messages. I raised my hand and said I had a question. I asked them if someone called to let me know a loved one was in a serious car crash, if they would let me know. He looked at me and said no, because I was there to work, nothing else. I stood up and started walking to the door. He asked me where I was going. I told him I'm leaving. He was like, we haven't started the test yet. I looked him in the eye and was told that nothing is more important than family. And if you want to tell me if a loved one was in a crash, then this is not a place for me. As I was walking out, there was a manager in the lobby. He asked me what was going on, and I told him. He got upset and asked me to please stay, and he will fix this. I said, no thanks. If someone from HR tells you the job is more important than family, I am done. So technically, I didn't even have an interview, even though they called me a couple times to come back and do the test. I told them I wasn't interested both times and never heard from them again. Edit, this was about 2002 or 2003. Story 13, we are a highly dynamic, fast-paced environment where we look for employees to take initiative. Basically, they're going to throw you into chaos without any help or proper training. We're family here. No, you leverage emotional blackmail to boost productivity and profits. Story 14, a lot of questions about handling interpersonal drama. Like, one or two find primary focus of interview. There's some going on there that is just not worth the stress. Story 15, my favorite question to ask is, what is the biggest challenge my role can face? And what kind of support do I have to access so I can navigate those challenges? If they respond with, oh, there are no challenges here, it's pretty easy as a lie for one of two reasons. Either the interviewer knows what the problems are at the job, and is lying to make the job look more attractive, or they're unaware of what the challenges are because HR or management is so toxic that none of the employees will actually come to them for help. Had a few jobs, once being a sales job that reposted the pain after 2 months answered that there are no problems, therefore there is no support because it's just that simple. I refused the offer. Had another one actually have to stop, think for a minute before they answered, and have me an example of a challenge and how the manager would help in that case. Sure, it could be a made-up scenario, but TBH, half the answers I give them are completely made up too. For those tell us about a time you had a problem with a manager customer and how you dealt with it answers. Even a place like McDonald's has problems that an employee can face off the job. Story 16, one of my potential employers told me I had to shave my beard as it was unprofessional. I asked, do I look unprofessional in a full suit, tie, etc.? I know you don't, it's just a company culture, bullet dodged. Story 17, if they start talking about religion in your interview. I applied for a job at a chicken salad chain, and they said God is always watching you, but especially in our restaurant. Story 18, yes, we offer remote work, but with crazy conditions to unravel, e.g., everyone is expected to sit in a video call all day muted but camera on, and the person interviewing you goes in the office. My colleagues can see me through the glass walls. To me, this feels no different. Story 19, they get your name wrong. They get your interview time wrong that they scheduled. They don't show up on time for your new interview time. They ask during the interview, which position are you applying for again? They make it obvious they're distracted doing something else on screen. And finally, all email communication is unprofessional with spelling errors and lulls. Happened to me. I turned down the second interview I was offered, and the response I got was that the team was disappointed in my decision. LOL. Story 20, I once interviewed for office assistant where the interview seemed to center around my willingness and ability to make outbound sales calls. I withdrew my interest and ended the interview after clarifying they were talking about the opening I had applied to, which said nothing about sales and listing. Story 21, I once showed up to an interview and they seemed surprised I was there despite being my scheduled time to interview. It then took them an hour to track down the person who was supposed to interview me, and the secretary kept apologizing about how bad the office smelled because something crawled into the ceiling and died, and they haven't got it removed yet. So yeah, there was some red flag for that place. Story 22, I was asked to review their company's latest brand video, highlighting their past year's success and all the great clients they worked with. Anything else you want to add? I was asked after presenting my notes. That's everything, I said. So nothing else then? The VP of the company asked. I felt pressed, so I called out a mistake in the video which was on their site, as well as published online, and across TVCDV, there's still filler text lorem ipsum in 2 spots. I said. Their CMO stood up and swore at me, calling me a liar. I calmly asked them to play back the video and pointed out. VP nods, CMO storms out. I got a job offer 3 days later. I declined it based on the temperature tantrum. Their HR director was dumbfounded at my reason. Story 23, how do you feel about working in a small work environment? That means they're trying to operate with the least amount of employees as possible, unless the pay is over 20 hours, since it's likely a hotel or motel, and I believe that's minimum wage for that field in Los Angeles County. Just don't unless you're ready to fight for your time off. Story 24, if they do the office tour, a bunch of employees have only been working there less than a year. This very often means they treat employees like the job sucks. Story 25, the male interviewers not letting the female interviewer, who's literally on the same side of the table as them, get a word in. I noped out of that one real quick. Story 26, this one's for younger people. If you have to pay money out of pocket for it, it's probably not a job. If you have to pay for training or to cover the initial cost of something or other, it might be normal to pay for a uniform or something, but even that should be able to be deducted from your first paycheck or whatever. Story 27, we have many candidates who want this job. Psychological pressure that implies you are replaceable. Be grateful that you're being considered. This is a toxic power dynamic. Story 28, if you are serious about a job offer. The offer itself should be accompanied by the specific details of not just the pay, but the benefits as well. Health insurances and retirement plans are 25% or more of total compensation. I should not have to find out on my first day of work that you only offer exchange plans and do not offer premium support. Acting crazy when I ask for details on all the types of compensation is a major red flag. Competitive is just not an acceptable answer. When you make an offer on a house, does your tender letter say you are willing to make a competitive amount without an actual number? In any other situation, you would be seen as an unserious tire kicker. Candidates deserve the same level of care and respect regarding the full financial impacts of what you're offering. Story 29, them asking you for money. Any job that requires you to pay them any kind of fee or reimbursement for supplies is a scam. Don't walk away. Run away. Story 30. Basically, anything that bothers you or is unprofessional to your eyes is a bad sign. But the reality is that a shitty company, to some people, might not be shitty for you at your level. It might be okay for you to work there and outgrow it. Story 31. If they ask what your reliable transportation is, most states that's illegal, because unless the job says you must have a car, you do not need to know how you get to work. Always means they'll skirt the law. Big sign they're anti-union too. Story 32. I had an interview. Start with a supervisor coming in hot, super cranky, saying he doesn't normal do interviews and didn't know what to ask, got annoyed and sent in a junior guy who really didn't know what to say. It was a complete waste of both our time and showed how disorganized the place was. It was a multinational bank and financial services company, but they lacked any formality or clarity in that introduction. Another place I interviewed immediately wanted me to take a test before I met the boss. Questions included some basic math, but others were strange, like every good dog has a select one option bone, water dish, house, collar. It was so friggin' weird. Finally, I got to have a conversation with the boss. And I swear, all he did for 45 minutes was talk endlessly about the job and what he didn't like. When the next boss walked in, he had nothing to say, to which I responded, "That's okay. I think the other guy spoke enough for both of us." He had a good laugh. I shook his hand and thanked him for his time and wished him luck on his continued search. I didn't even want to consider an offer from that loony bin. Story 33. Depends on where you are and how much you are willing to tolerate and how desperate you are to switch. I'm in a senior role working for 22 years now, and with no particular strong reason to switch jobs. My current employer has a very strong MNC culture. AMD, we generally treat each other with a lot of courtesy and respect. Still, I ended up interviewing for a senior role at one of the big 4S recently. Just curiosity, I guess, and the HR person was a friend of mine. Anyway, I turned up for a 30-minute Teams call. The interviewer turned up 10 minutes late. No apologies, didn't introduce himself, nor did he explain the role. Instead, he jumped straight away into what I believe he supposed was a grilling exercise. He wouldn't let me complete, kept interrupting me with his next question before I had finished answering the previous question. His whole demeanor was as if I was lying about my role and my experience. Kept referring to me as boss. At one point, he said, "Boss, you're using a lot of big words. Can you explain in ordinary language?" Like I was explaining a highly technical advisory project my team had done and was keeping it as simple as I could. I really felt like walking out, but tolerated him out of respect for my HR friend. After the call, I called my friend and said thanks, but no thanks. So for me, a basic level of courtesy and respectful professionalism is an absolute must. If he was talking to me in that manner, I shudder to think how he treats juniors. Not for me. Quite happy where I am. Story 34. When the interview is conducted by 4 separate hostile managers who dryly fire questions at you before you can finish answering the last question, I'd gladly answer your question once I'm finished answering her question if I still thought I'd be interested in a position here. However, based largely on this interview process, I don't believe that's still the case. I could see myself out. Thanks. True story. Story 35. Sales manager said that during our next interview, he wants to see my customer list and how much business L will bring. L got up, said no thanks, and left the interview never to return. Story 36. All right, one last thing. What if I told you that you could be your own boss and work from home on your own terms? All you have to do is commit to our upline. And Story 37. I went to an interview a few days ago. They flat out told me, if you talk about your salary with other people here and you're caught, you'll be fired. Never went back. Story 38. I just had this in a tech interview. Key things that concern me were references to fast-paced work environment, wearing many hats, pivoting priorities daily, and references to pushing really hard now for the benefit of later. Sounded messy. Story 39. When the job turns out to be something else, compared to what was mentioned in the job ad. I once went to an interview about a job that would end up with a degree in carpentry after working there under the supervision of a senior worker for set time. What they actually offered was the job of monitoring a production line that made kitchen worktops from recycled plastic. I walked away. Some years later, the company was in the headlines for having committed a massive environmental crime, releasing microplastic and all sorts of chemicals in the nature. Story 40. The interviewer, not understanding the question they asked you to answer. I had a future manager, asked me if I could draw an example of 3-tier system architecture for them. I did, and she told me I was wrong, and that it was only 2-tier. I did get the job. I took the 3rd day off when I released the job was also not what was advertised. I was told 50 of the job would be designing system architecture. It was not. It was IT project management. Simply put, my manager had no clue. My partner at the time convinced me to stay and not quit. What played out was 2 years of... For those that don't know, a tier in this case refers to a layer of computing processing in IT. So code running on a server would be 1 tier, a database would be another, and code on a client browser in terms of JavaScript would be another. And when we refer to a simple three-tier architecture for web, this is what we mean. Story 41, we're a family here. Expect to be guilt-tripped, threatened, and having to work way outside the scope of what you were originally hired for. We believe in giving 100 of the time. You better appear to be working even if there's nothing to do. If it's a non-emergency service, and you're expected to be able to be on call at all times. Flexible schedule means your schedule, not theirs. They refuse to discuss wages or benefits and act offended when you bring them up. Story 42, I had a company tell me they pride themselves on working 55 to 60 hours in a normal week. As a salary employee with no overtime, I laughed, and they got offended. Story 43, when the interviewer can't help but kiss his own. That's caustic, narcissistic behavior on display. When they don't want to talk salary or hone in too much on mine. When it's a panel interview, and the goal of everyone is to trip you up instead of asking genuine questions. Story 44, what position are you interviewing for? This was for a long-term acute care hospital. Then after I answered they were like for the SoCal hospital, I applied to one in Northern California. I was like, nope, if they can't even get my basic application, right? The red flags came up immediately. Story 45, worst interview I ever had was for a management position, and they were very vague about the nature of the company. I show up, and am told my interview would be with one of the managers, and head show me the job en route. Confused, we exit the building, and he shows me the products he sells door to door to people working in business, basically bugging people at work to try to sell them perfume or other, saying he buys the stuff cheap from the company, and the profit you can get is only capped by how high a price you can convince people to pay. I said no thanks and left. Story 46, too many interviews. When they don't know how their hiring process works, I've got told after a telephone interview that I could come in for a day and get an offer after that they wanted another interview after I spent 8 hours with them total already. Do they reimburse your travel expense? When the company benefits get worse every time you talk to someone at a job fair. They told me 4 to 5 days home office is normal. At the first interview, they said I have to come in twice a week, but they have offices nearby I can use. At the end of the second interview, I had to travel a couple of days every 6 months or so to a city far away. Same company that wanted a third interview after promising an offer after the second one. When they promise you a big raise within a year if you're good at the job, yeah, they'll bury you with work and claim you're just not good enough. Story 47, I work sales, and twice I interviewed where they said they had to lay off their entire sales staff. I turned down the second interview both times. I work small companies that has a small sales team of 3 or 4 who quit around the same time. When your work buddy finds a better job, it inspires other team members to do the same. Story 48, the worst job of my life. After my interview, I was talking with one of my prospective coworkers, and he told me you don't want to work here, so that. Story 49, in 2018, I interviewed at a maxillofacial surgery center for an office assistant position. The job ad listed 15 hours as the salary. During the job interview, they explained to me that I would start as a probationary employee with a salary of 13 hours, and after 90 days, if all of the practice's partners agreed, I would be made permanent and a raise to 15 hours. I told them that the job ad listed 15 hours and made no mention of a probationary period and that they should be honest in their job ads so they don't waste candidates' time and their own time. Then I walked out. I just saw a job ad a few weeks ago for the same position, same practice. Makes me wonder if they ever actually found anyone during all this time, or if they have learned anything. Probably not. Story 50, based on the worst place I have ever worked. During the interview, you're seated at the end of a large table with a bunch of people seated around it, each one peppering you with questions, machine gun style, with them talking over each other. It felt like an interrogation more than an interview. It turns out that it was a family business, with the father giving each of his kids a department to manage, and they all guarded their kingdom ferociously. Something as simple as ordering a computer took forever. The computer had to be ordered through the computer department. Any upgrades, like video cards or memory, had to come through the service department since they were parts, and any software, including a copy of Windows, had to come through the stationary department manager, who only puts in an order once a month no matter what. The TLDR, avoid family businesses with sibling rivalry at all costs. Story 51, if they list sales as one of the duties of the job, no matter how many other things they list or how minor they claim the sales responsibilities will be, the job is in sales. That will be your main duty, guaranteed. Story 52, first job interview I ever had. The manager showed up 10 minutes late. I was 15 minutes early and didn't have papers together. I wasn't even interviewed. It was straight to signing papers to be hired. Other employees interrupted the interview. several times. There was an instance where an employee made a racially motivated joke to a coworker in front of customers, and the manager's response was, "Don't scare him away. I need this position filled," had to ask me my name twice and never reference my name to any other employee. Safe to say I did not follow up with training like I was supposed to, and am not ashamed of it. Edit forgot to mention the position I was hired for was not the one I applied for. The pay was significantly lower, and when I mentioned it, I was told that the application is just a general app, and they fill what they need. That's not what was advertised on Mail. Story 53, I interviewed for a job as general manager of a cable TV company. The politically connected minority owner had been filling in as GM. In the interview, she made it clear that there were 2 people on the staff who she had hired and you won't have to worry about them at all, which I interpreted as these are my flying monkeys, and if you do anything to them, you'll be fired. No thanks. Funny thing is, I went to work for the same company 2 years later in a different city, and they were the best I ever worked for. Story 54, my job was 2 separate interviews, a government background check, 2 days of orientation, and about 50 documents and tests in the company's internal system. Look at the cars of the employees in the parking lot. If you see a bunch of bombed-out beaters GTFO, cause they ain't paying their employees. Look at the workers during the walkthrough. Do they look happy, complacent, or sad? A company will tell you what you want to hear, and it's all sunshine and roses. Research what the nationwide average is for the position you are applying for before negotiating a starting wage or salary. Pay attention to medical benefits and other benefits offered. A lot of places will try to start you with like 3 days of vacation a year and act like they're doing you a favor. Try to research the company you're applying for. Is it well liked in the community? Does it have scandals? Good management can make or break a company. Treating the workers with respect is crucial and directly tied to the company's profit. Ask other employees if the place has a high turnover rate and if they often fill positions with temps. Just because you took a job doesn't mean you are obligated to stay because they offered you a job. It doesn't take long to realize if a job is a hellhole. I once applied to a pontoon building shop and realized that it was basically a sweatshop. Walked the out and never looked back. Ended up with a much better, much higher paying job. Some people don't know how to discern a good job from a bad job because it's all they know, or they have only had jobs in the past. Just because other people will eat doesn't mean you have to. Story 55, I went in for a job interview at a place my grandfather had worked and subsequently retired from. When he was there, I knew the environment was great and management was also great. I applied for pretty much the same position he had, just in a different building and scaled down a bit. I interviewed and promptly got offered a maintenance job paid less, longer hours, but a 4-day work week. And there was 2 p.m. to midnight. I told the lady that wasn't what I was interviewing for at all. I was here for X position. She refused. I asked her why she was interviewing me for that position, only to offer me something entirely different. She didn't have a response. I walked out. On my way out, I ran into a few guys my grandfather had worked with. They remembered me and told me to run. The new management apparently was driving the place into the ground, and they couldn't keep people. I since have gotten into the carpentry union and am much happier, despite 2 layoffs because the industry isn't doing too hot at the moment. Story 56, went to a job interview where they 1 lost my resume and application, 2 complained that no one wants to work nowadays while shuffling G through applications while I'm sitting in the job interview, 3 hired me on the spot, 4 rescheduled my first day 3 times, and 5 sent me home on my actual first day because they didn't do any of my paperwork and told me to come back tomorrow. I did not come back tomorrow. Story 57, in my experience, how comfortable are you with ambiguity and juggling multiple priorities? Means they have no clue as to what they're doing as a company. Story 58, this happened back in 1986. I had a job interview in the Orlando area, and this interviewer told me that it was dangerous for me as a woman to drive down I-4. He wouldn't allow his 14-year-old daughter to do so. At the time, I was 24 years old and was in disbelief that this guy said this to me. Wasn't 14 years old, but 24 years old. I doubt he would have said this to a man, and if he did, the guy would probably get up, walk out, and not return, or things he was weird or something. I didn't get the job, felt like walking away at that point, but didn't, as this would be seen as rude. Story 59, had an interview scheduled for a specific time. I showed up 10 minutes early, and they had a line of 7 people waiting for a single interviewer. One guy walked out and didn't seem very happy about his interview. I walked right back out the door. The main thing was I knew my time wasn't going to be respected. The disappointed man was just the icing on the cake. I also had an interview where the receptionist had no idea that an interview was scheduled, should have tipped me off that the staff were disorganized, and there was a communication problem. Story 60, when there's not an interview, my first ever job, I got hired without a formal interview, just a text from the boss saying when I was going to start. I was 14, ended up working alone in a pretty popular boba shop in my town. It was terrible. Story 61, any job, trying to fill a position immediately that doesn't normally have high turnover and the business isn't growing. Chances are it has high turnover or terrible management. Story 62, I once had an interview that was a half-mile walk from my house. Great pay, great benefits, and I was killing it in the interview. Then one of them asked, "How well do you deal with conflict?" And his colleague piped up with, "People have major disagreements here pretty regularly, and it can get very emotionally charged." I was speechless. Left the moment I could, and tried hard not to literally run out of the building.